You're listening to a bonus episode of the Naked Mallrat podcast by Libolibo Studio. I'm Ilya Kolmanovsky. This show is about scientific discoveries and people behind them. I talk to a lot of outstanding scientists for the podcast, but it's impossible to fit full conversations into the main episodes. So you can listen to them here in their original form. Please tap to rate and comment on us on Apple Podcasts. It's very important to us that people find out about this podcast. Naked Mallrat Podcast. Spread the word. So far, we know that humans are the only creatures that can communicate with each other using meaningless symbols that make sense when combined. It's called the duality of patterning, and that's how we make words out of speech sounds and understand each other. But just think, we might not be the only ones with this ability. The authors of a paper published in Nature Communications have studied sperm whale vocalisations and raised the possibility that this could be the first example of duality of patterning in another species. Today I speak to one of the authors of the paper, whale biologist Shane Gero. We'll talk about the work on the study, the ways in which sperm whales communicate with each other, and the role of AI in exploring all this.
My name is Shane Gero, and I'm a Canadian whale biologist. I am the lead biologist for Project SETI, and the founder of the Dominica Sperm Whale Project, and I'm a scientist in residence at Canada's Carleton University.
Amazing. I know you've been in the field with sperm whales for about 20 years. Could you describe a sperm whale for us, for those who are not familiar with this animal?
Yeah, I mean, they're this sort of magnificent, enigmatic being. You know, they live in part of the world that we find difficult to explore, even with the submarines that we have. You know, they're longer than a bus, and they might weigh as much as 10 of them. And they have these big, giant, block-shaped noses that are filled with, you know, the most powerful natural biosonar system on the planet. They have the largest brain that's ever existed on our planet. They make some of the deepest and longest dives. So they have a lot of extremes to them, and yet they live in these small families that are led by their grandmothers' grandmothers, and just sort of live nomadically in the big open ocean. So they're both these amazing physical animals and these amazing, beings living their lives in surprisingly familiar ways.
Amazing. And I know you've been listening to their clicks probably even before SETI. Could you please talk about those clicks, their communication, your impressions and your feelings about them?
Yeah, absolutely. So, sperm whales live in the darkest part of the ocean, in a place where no light ever reaches. And so they live in a world of sound. They use sound to navigate around the bottom of the ocean. They use sound to find food. Just like bats in the darkness of the night sky, sperm whales make clicks for echolocation. So a loud sound goes out, and it bounces off their prey, which is mainly squid, and the echo comes back to them, and they're able to sort of find out where they are. Echolocation, right? The where you are by using the echoes, and those sounds are quite loud. They're amongst the most powerful sounds made by any animal, and so we can hear that basically all the time. And it's the way that we follow them around when they spend an hour at a time deep beneath the ocean. But the sounds that they make that are sort of exciting for this paper, but also in terms of just imagining what the world might be like from the perspective of a sperm whale, are these other sounds they make called codas. And they're also clicks, but they make them in rhythmic patterns. So a common one in the Caribbean sounds sort of like this. So it's very abrupt clicking, but with a rhythmic pattern that's recognizable. And sperm whales can make dozens of these types of codas. And trying to understand that communication system was the drive behind this new study.
Were you trying to listen into those clicks and try to figure out what they mean just by yourself as a naturalist who is following his favorite subject with your brain?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've had the great honor of spending thousands of hours in the company of sperm whale families. And it's hard not to sit there, on a small boat with a little hydrophone dipped into this giant amphitheater of the underwater world. And to see these whales, especially the young ones, cousins or siblings, rolling around, playing with each other and just making this clatter, this cacophony of codas. It's hard not to see, my kids playing with their cousins in their bedroom, and they make all sorts of things up when they're talking to one another. So, it seems hard to believe that there isn't some kind of information or communication going on. And yet we sit there and we listen to them, and after all this time, I can recognize some of the animals by hearing them without having to see them.
How?
Well, so some animals make codas that are very rare, not entirely unique, but pretty rare, and we don't yet know why. But so there's a few animals that are easy, right? Where you hear something like Fingers, who's one of the elder females in a well-known family called Family Unit F. She makes a coda that virtually no one else makes. And so we hear that and immediately that Fingers is nearby.
And that's something you would be able to express with your words. Like to a new comer to your lab, would you be able to explain to a graduate student, this is what it sounds like?
Yeah, I think I'm far enough along that there's definitely things that I hear that aren't as obvious to someone newer. But there are, the different coda rhythms are definitely obvious even to anyone who's never heard a sperm whale before. Especially some of the ones that we use to recognize the different dialects, right? So these families, these female-led families, there might be dozens and dozens of them, let's say in the Caribbean, and those that speak the same dialect of codas, that use the same repertoire of different coda rhythms, we call a clan. And those sperm whale clans differ in their habitat use, their movement behavior, what they eat, and of course their codas. And they're really these different cultures. It's really this social boundary between us, those that make the 1 + 1 + 3 coda, and them, those that don't, right? And so those identity codas, they're pretty easy to tell apart for anyone who's listening. The Eastern Caribbean clan makes that 1 + 1 + 3 that we just said, and then there's another clan of families that live in the Caribbean that never make that sound, but their identity coda is still 5 clicks, but it's 5 very slow clicks in a row. So it sounds more like this, right? And that's easy to tell apart from just the rhythm of it, right? Regardless of anything else. And that's what the last sort of, 30 years of sperm whale research has focused on, is these really emergent patterns of these whales make those rhythms and those whales make that rhythm. And that's why we've sort of being able to learn a lot about sperm whales by just looking at the timing of clicks and nothing else, right? And this study brings us a step farther by looking at more parameters of what they say.
Then comes in SETI. Can you tell us why did you get involved with SETI and what SETI is about?
Well, SETI is this amazing opportunity to work with these amazing people, from roboticists to physical acousticians to computer scientists and machine learners and linguists. 20 years ago, I think it would have been very challenging to have a linguist have a productive conversation with a whale biologist, and that was true also when animal behavior researchers started talking about the idea of animal culture,
What's your impression of communication with linguists? You told us about your impressions from whales.
The irony of all of this, of course, is SETI's pursuit is to sort of listen deeply and to decode what's important to sperm whales, what's so important to them that they want to talk about it with each other, right? And the irony of that is, in the pursuit of understanding what whales might be saying to each other, we've had to learn to understand each other from different fields, right? So I had zero exposure to AI or machine learning or neural networks, whatever sort of buzzword you want to apply to all of this, really at all. And so when, I met Patricia, who's the lead author on this study, we had to learn how to communicate what a coda is and what sperm whale behavior might be and what our behavioral expectations might be for what codas are for. And then she needed to communicate to me, these complex models that she was bringing from other fields that hadn't been applied to sperm whale world before. And so that was fascinating. And in terms of the linguistics in particular, we're working with this amazing gentleman named Gasper Bergus from UC Berkeley. And he is so open-minded and he's so great at thinking, well, what does this mean in terms of articulation? What are the parallels in terms of human language? And that's really exciting,
Amazing.
So I mean, that's what's been for me so rewarding, is not just the progress we're making in the science, but to see someone whose career was, I'm going to go into robotics or natural language processing, get onto a boat off of Dominica and just fall in love with the sperm whales that are right there, right? And to be so immediately jumping in with both feet in terms of understanding the families and wanting to know who the whales are. That's really exciting. And in some ways, it gives me hope that the mission of trying to understand what's important to whales may actually drive this societal shift to be better neighbors to the animals that live in the ocean, right? If we can convince a hardcore roboticist that sperm whale conservation is important when he's never really, or she has never really thought about these things, is kind of an exciting internal process at SETI, which we hope grows outside too.
Stepping stone. This new data and this new Nature paper, was it made on some of the older data, or does it already come from this new vast effort to beacon and to record so much more data? Is it?
Yeah, so this analysis was done on the data set that the Sperm Whale Project had collected before the onset of SETI. Patricia was one of the very first students to come on board SETI, even before SETI was sort of officially SETI. And so, like all good science, it takes some time to do the analysis and then to get the analysis out to the world in a publication. So that's kind of exciting, though, because what it says is that when we apply these new methods, existing data is still a really rich place to make new findings, right? Despite SETI's approach to collecting this massive new data set that's designed for sort of machine learning approaches. So that was kind of an exciting thing about it.
Fascinating. Okay. So what did you learn? What did AI learn in this new paper? What are we learning from AI?
Yeah, well, so what's really exciting about this is that we're looking at a different perspective about codas than we've looked at before. So one of the funny moments that led to this paper was that, after we handed the Sperm Whale Project data set over to the Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Lab at MIT, where Patricia works, and Jacob and Antonio and Daniela, she created this new way of visualizing the data, just a different plot, which is what appears in this paper, the exchange plot. And we hadn't really looked at codas in that way before, but when she plotted it that way, there are these obvious patterns that kind of jumped out. And then we went about doing, or Patricia predominantly went about doing all of this amazing science to show that those patterns were real and not just something that we could see in the visualization. What we found was something that we termed ornamentation, which is when whales are talking with one another, they exchange codas. And sometimes they take turns like that, back and forth and back and forth. And sometimes they overlap their clicks, so the two whales are making codas at the exact same time. And in a series of codas, sometimes there'll be, a 4-click coda, 4-click codas, 4-click codas, and then there'll be a 5-click coda, and then a 4-click coda, and a 4-click coda. And what we found is that those codas with the extra click on the end are actually just the same rhythm as the 4-click codas that are made on either side, plus an extra click, right? So, it adds sort of like... it's not really akin to a suffix in human language, but there's like an extra little bit that's being added on. Just acoustically listening to it, it's really hard to hear even for someone like me. But when you look at it across the pattern of an exchange between a whale A and whale B, it's really obvious. So it's just like an extra click that they add on to the pattern, and it seems to be that it's at interesting times in the conversation, like within specific contexts, that we see these things happening.
What context?
So it appears, and we're still working on this in more detail because I think we'll need more data, because the ornaments don't happen super frequently. But it seems like they're related to turn taking or onset or ending of conversations. And so it's really interesting, but that's something that we need to investigate more.
Is this a bit like when we talk on the radio and I kind of say over to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's not 100% consistent like that, where we say, we're making a right turn over, and then the other person on the side of the radio knows. And part of that is because they're having conversations at the same time. It's not rude in sperm whale society to speak at the same time as the person you're speaking with. In fact, we think that this matching and overlapping of codas probably is one form of vocal grooming, where they reinforce social bonds. In the same way that, primates build relationships by cleaning each other's fur, sperm whales don't have hands to do that, but they're able to do that vocally by building their relationship by, not necessarily proving that they can match what you're saying, but that these conversations reinforce social bonds in the same way that keeping up to date with your friends keeps your social bonds together, right? Even if it's just by phone.
Yeah, I'm kind of nodding right now. That's all I can do. I'm trying not to ruin the tape.
This conversation would go very differently if we were sperm whales. We'd be talking at the same time.
Amazing. And what are rubatos?
Yeah, so rubato is something else that sort of jumped out at us when we looked at the exchange plot, when we started looking at sperm whale codas in context of how they're exchanged between whales. And what happens is these whales are able to make very small variation in the duration of a coda, right? So if you have a certain rhythm, let's say that 1 + 1 + 3 coda, sometimes they're half a second long, right? And sometimes they're almost 1.5 seconds long. So there's a lot of variation in how long that rhythm is, the tempo of that rhythm. And so that variation of tempo, that they increase it over the course of 10 or 12 codas, or decrease it over the course of a number of codas, or vary it across a conversation up and down in terms of duration, that's what we call rubato. But what's additionally amazing is that the whale that they're speaking to seems to be able to match that change in duration extremely accurately, right? Even with only a knowledge of like 1 or 2 clicks of the previous coda, they're able to match that very well. And that kind of vocal matching or vocal imitation is really, really interesting. And it's a facet of codas that we hadn't seen before because we never really looked at it in the context of conversation, right? We were so focused on building repertoires of who was saying what, we didn't look at the context of when they were saying it to each other. And the second we did that, by looking at codas across time in an exchange, rubato sort of jumped right off the screen.
So when are they doing those rubatos? What's the context?
It seems like they do it basically all the time whenever they're exchanging codas between whale A and B. So A will make a coda, B will make a coda, A and B make a coda at the same time, A and B make a coda at the same time, A and B make a coda at the same time. But as that conversation happens, let's say they might increase the duration of the coda across those 5, 6, 10 codas. But the whales are able to match that change even when there's an inflection point where they're increasing, and then whale A and B decrease the duration at the same time. And it's, we're talking on timescales of less than a second. So there's a number of questions that we have about how they do that and why they do that. But what it does is sort of increase, the encoding space of what might carry meaning when whales talk to each other. Because now you no longer have just a 1 + 1 + 3, but you have, whether you bin them into tempo types or you have a continuous stream, you have 1 + 1 + 3s that are half a second and 1 + 1 + 3s that might be 1.3 seconds. And there's a lot of potential variation in there, And so, it sort of opens up the space where we can look for, where animals might be exchanging information.
Are you developing an ability to hear that with your own ear?
Yeah. I think it's fair to say that rubato is really hard to hear by ear. And I think it's one of the reasons why, it took someone from a different field to say, if we were going to look at this, we would look at it this way and to see it for the first time. Because it's really hard to hear, even if I present you with two 1+1+3 codas and one's really short and one's really long, you can hear the difference in isolation. But to hear the minor variations across time, it's really, really tough to hear rubato. Remember that the cetacean brain is huge, for one. For two, it's equally complex as ours, and their auditory cortex is different than ours, right? Their world is a world of sound. So while we can see various shades of green really, really well, it's pretty unlikely that whale eyeballs see really good variation in shades of green. But it's probably very likely that their, auditory system can hear minor variations in click duration, right?
What's the next step with this amazing AI project?
Well, I think what's really exciting about this is now we have all these new ways that codas can vary, right? In conversation or just stand alone in terms of what a 1+1+3 rhythm type is now. And so we want to apply the behavior to this, right? So what causes that variation? When does that variation occur? What are the whales doing? Who are the whales? Maybe a lot of it has to do that the whales slow down their codas when there are calves around, because that's something we see in other species, this sort of motherese, where you speak slightly slower to babies so that they can hear what you mean, right? And so, that's really the next big step. What behavioral change or what behavioral contexts do we see this change? One of the things that I think SETI will help a lot with is something that I jokingly call the dentist's office problem, which is if you only record English in a Canadian dentist's office, you're going to think that English-speaking Canadian society that the word root canal is really, really important to that, right? When really it's because you've only recorded this weird context in this one part of English-speaking Canadian society. And so that's really important, is to look across social contexts. Do mothers, when they talk to their babies, speak the same when they're talking to other females? Does it matter if they're more related, if they're more gregarious, their social behavior? And also when, are the more heavily varied rubato when they're diving for food or when they're socializing. So connecting all of this variation to behavior, because once you connect it to the context, then it starts sort of pointing towards more what the meaning might be. What is the function of these sounds and the variation in these sounds, and how might that be encoded in meaning?
And meanwhile, AI would continue to decipher these complexities, and it might go really far in really, deciphering the language. So 10 years from now, imagine AI is really advanced with understanding this language, and you are really advanced with matching it to the behavior. What's your dream?
I think my dream is, that fundamentally understanding what's important to another species that seems so fundamentally different from us, but the more time we spend with them, we find these sort of deep similarities, and communicating those to a wider audience sort of changes the way in which we relate to the natural world, And we've seen a little bit of that already just in our conversations and public communication around animal culture, Sperm whales, it's very important who they are and where they come from, and that resonates with a lot of people. And I can have a conversation in an auditorium or a lecture in an auditorium, and everyone starts nodding when I talk about the importance of cultural diversity in our society. And yet a politician from that same area maybe can't have that conversation yet. I think those kinds of things are really powerful, right? The awe that is struck by these animals can deliver people to a place where we build bigger definitions of we, rather than making smaller and smaller ones where everyone seems to be they, and they are always against us. And I think that is sort of going to be, the downfall to human civilization. So, one thing you learn from spending a lot of time with sperm whales, whether you understand them yet or not, is that they overcome large obstacles in their lives by building bigger definitions of us rather than smaller ones. So that's like globally what I think, and I have a hope for in terms of Project SETI, is fundamentally sperm whales are different than us. They're the size of a school bus. They live in a part of the world we don't understand. And yet we can talk about how important their grandmothers are and how important who they are is to them and how important their siblings are, and communally taking care of each other and being good neighbors. And those fundamental similarities, whether they have what, humans might consider language or not, those fundamental similarities are really important for understanding why we're all here, whale or human.
Would you be interested in any playback experiments?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's one of the best scientific ways to ground our thinking, right? So when we come to a conclusion that these codas happen here and they make the whales do this and it changes their behavior because, eventually at some point there's a need to sort of have a whale in the loop experiment, so to speak. And I think that's been fundamentally important for understanding animal communication for a long time. But I think it's really, really important to have a really good understanding of what you're playing back to wild animals.
Why?
Well, because this is their world, right? So, I mean, if I was trying to learn a language I didn't know, it's not particularly productive to walk into a room and just start playing that language back, right?
What would be the worst case scenario? What would be the worst thing you could play back to them in terms of consequences?
Well, I think any research that we do with wild animals needs to be cognizant of the fact that they're wild and we're trying to understand who they are, right? And so, we want to be as minimally invasive in their life as possible in order to understand who they are. That's ultimately our goal, right? The goal of a two-way conversation where the whales teach us something is not necessarily, what drives me to do this. I think what drives me is to, after so many years of watching them be so much more than the science can describe them as, is to try and understand who they are, right? So, there's no need to go out and do experiments without having a really solid understanding of what you expect to occur, right? And something as interactive as a playback falls into that category for me.
But if you get to a point where with the help of your AI tools, you really get that deep knowledge, would you like to talk to the whale? And if you could, what would you like to tell her?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things there. The first is, having a conversation with someone involves both parties being interested in that, right? So there's a lot of questions about if we pursue playback experiments in that way, how to best do that, right? Whether it's from a boat or whether it's from an autonomous device that can listen and reply, because we know a lot of species are interested in novel objects in the water, so I think it sort of does a disservice to the whales and to the researchers and humans listening, to say, what would you say to them? Because I think for me, I want to learn what they're saying to each other. Like I'm a whale biologist, right? I'm not, I don't know what the word would be, but I want to know what's important to the whales and what they're saying to each other when whales are being whales. My role is not to involve myself in their day-to-day activity. Although, I'm out there on a boat listening. So, people often ask me that I'm able to recognize so many of the whales. Do I think they recognize me? And I think my answer to that is always, I think they recognize my boat. But I don't think I have the hubris to think that they recognize me as a person, right? And I think that's the right way to approach, the trying to study another species is to try and actually value what they're doing in their own life. But yeah, I think playbacks will be inevitable in terms of trying to really ground what we think we've learned.
And in general, thank you for all that you're doing and for this amazing interview, and good luck with your work.
Oh, thank you so much. I hope you get to meet the sperm whales one day.
This is my big, big dream. I would love that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Things are rapidly changing in Dominica in terms of there's now a marine protected area for the sperm whales that's being established federally. So the whale tourism is changing, but there's still opportunities to go and see them.
You mean it's changing in the direction that it gets more restricted? It's harder to see them in Dominica?
Yeah, the government last fall, made a huge decision to establish a sperm whale reserve that covers about the same size as the island on the west coast, which is where most of the whale families are. So So it's really exciting, and I'm really proud of the government for making that decision.
Good for you. You've been very generous with your time, and thank you so much.
This was a bonus episode of the Naked Mallrat podcast by Libolibo Studio. I'm Ilya Kolmanovsky. Goodbye.